Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game Mess. So, Target is the video that everyone has been expecting me to make. I just had to wait a long time to get my Analogue 3D in. That is because Amazon shipping decided 8 days was the amount of time they needed to get that thing from California to Illinois. But it is here. I'm going to be doing an entire unboxing as well as a full review of the Analogue 3D with a few comparisons in preparation for a part 2 where I ask you what you want to see and you leave me comments down below. But the Analogue 3D is here. We're going to unbox it and review the whole damn thing because it has been quite the wait to actually get a hold of one of these things. And now that people are getting them in their hands, it's time for me to talk about exactly what's going on here. And I will say right off the top, I know I've made videos saying that I don't like Analogue 3D's communication and PR department, but as I always promised you, I'm going to be reviewing this hardware without any preconditions as to what I would actually say, based upon me not loving the fact that Analogue barely even told people why this thing was delayed. Before I get too far involved though, do me a huge favor, go down below, hit like and subscribe and ring that notification bell, definitely helps us out. And if you feel so inclined and want to support the channel, got a Patreon link down below as well. And if you don't want to have a review of Object as Designed, just go ahead and skip to minute 8 and you'll get right into the meat of all of the testing. Unfortunately, I have broken the seal here, so my resale value on the scalper market is now way diminished, because trust me, I'm seeing these things pop up on eBay and it is a bummer. But as far as Analogue's actual shipping quality is concerned, the object should get inside of a box. Honestly, nobody does it better. It's kind of the Apple ethos of actually putting a product in a package so you actually feel like you're getting something to experience before you even put the power into the machine and actually play around with it. Well, I will say that box right now is definitely a handprint magnet. I saw that on camera through the actual viewfinder and I was surprised just to see how much skin oil it actually took up. Honestly, that's not a problem whatsoever, but I like to observe some of the strange things. And because there are a lot of Analogue 3D reviews out there from the review roundup, which I was not part of, I figured we try to do things just a little bit differently. When you actually open up the box, you have the Analogue 3D right in front of you, and I will say, just like pretty much any other Analogue product, the case design is absolutely exceptional. It feels like a very premium product. No corners were cut, except for the fact that the corners around it, they definitely cut those for sure. And you'll see you even get a little bit of an engraving here. I went for the black model just because I actually prefer black consoles to white, but that is one of those things that is subjective, and I'm sure in the future you're going to start seeing some color models on here. The box is definitely sparse and Spartan, just like every other Analogue product that's ever come before it. You get just enough in the box for what you need, nothing more, nothing less, but I will say the box material quite squishy, and then you get what I would call kind of like a chocolate box paper here, and underneath you get 2 cleaning cloths and supplies to clean your N64 carts. I'm sure Analogue was thinking a lot of people are going to start plugging things into the Analogue 3D and say that their machine is broken because it's not reading the cartridge. I clean my carts maybe once a year as I take them out and play them, but this was definitely a smart move on Analogue's part to actually put these in the box, because a lot of people out there are going to have some very dingy, dirty N64 carts. Because remember, this product might be for you and I, but it is also for the casual audience that has a couple N64 games for their childhood and just wants to play them the easiest way possible. They are definitely not keeping up on their cartridge cleaning, I can guarantee you that for sure. But I am impressed with the overall design and function of this case. You have your 4 controller ports up front just like you would on a regular Nintendo 64. They fit the controller port really well and snug without being too tight or too loose. And it really is a nice touch to use original controllers on this machine, because it's one of those things. I have the 8-bit Do controller and I did some of the testing with that, but for me, nothing does the same as far as analog input values are concerned as the original N64 controller. The analog values on that, how they're read into the machine, is better on an OEM controller than anything else on the market. I would say 8-bit Do as well as the Brawler 64 get close, but you're not going to beat the actual original. Around the back, it's pretty simple, a couple USB ports, an HDMI port out, as well as a full-size SD card that you can use for your overall updating. And on the bottom, I will say, not really good for repairability. I was going to take this thing apart, but I decided I didn't really want to take the entire rubber off. But if you really want to see a full teardown in another video, leave me some comments down below and you tell me, especially when I test this thing against MiSTer FPGA, leave me some tests down below you want to see. A few might just organically appear in this video, but for the most part, that's going to be a video too. And I will say, if you knock this thing off the table, you took the whole fucking table with it, because that rubber pad is going to do exactly what it needs to, nothing more and nothing less. And as far as the overclock mode, we're going to get into that as well, but that really is where a lot of people are getting pretty amused by this system. It's one of those things. N64 games by default could definitely be slideshows, and games like Perfect Dark definitely felt like they should have been launch day GameCube titles and not end-of-life titles for the N64, because it pushes at the hardware and basically makes it cry every single time you want to play the game. This is the overclock mode. We'll definitely be getting into a little bit of overclock MiSTer FPGA versus Analogue 3D later in the video. Definitely look out for that, because it is one of the games that's very easy to test against. But honestly, just getting some gameplay in here, I absolutely enjoy what the Analogue 3D is doing, and it is fun. It's definitely delivering its promises of playing N64 carts for sure. Now, one thing that I don't particularly love, and it is just a very small quibble, is the fact that the power button isn't stationary. It's a momentary switch with a soft touch feel. On N64, you push the power button up and it stays there until you release it. Here you can see it returns right back to its position. And as far as the reset button is concerned, definitely emulates the overall oval shape from an N64 console, and that is just perfectly fine. And trust me, I get it. Complaining about the power button, even if it isn't a complaint, is a very minor thing. It's just one of those things. I like a tactile button more than I do something that's momentary. But the best part about this is I don't have to use the 8BitDo controller, because while that has been good for N64 games, I really want that original analog value. I don't really love how the actual controller feels in my hand. I've always thought it cramps my hand, but it definitely does a better job on the movement input, especially in stuff like Super Mario 64. So the fact that the Analogue 3D can utilize whatever you really want to use for controllers is a nice touch. You can go old school with the OEM controller, or you can go modern with something like the 8BitDo. The choice is completely up to yours. Obviously, there isn't a controller in the actual package. Just be aware that if you do want to use that 8BitDo 64 controller, you have to update the firmware before you actually touch it, or else it is not going to pair with the machine and you're not going to be using it. I will leave a link in the description below to the 8BitDo update website, and I have had a couple of people talking on Discord saying that their controller didn't work, and that was why. And the one nice thing about the Analogue 3D, which makes perfect sense and is a bonus over a stock N64, is the fact that the cartridge slot has the cutouts, or lack thereof, for the security quote-unquote features on different region cards. A Japanese Bomberman Hero cart is going to have the notches in a different place than a North American cart. So if you have an N64 and you like to import games and you haven't cut those tabs out, or if you're like me and you don't really like cutting plastic out of a machine, that is something that is taken care of here. Because my N64 is bone stock, no RGB mods, no HDMI mods, no cuts on the cartridge slot. That's the way I like to keep it. So Analogue 3D will definitely be an asset if I want to play my original cartridges and I want to play my Japanese region stuff. Because you can see back and forth, we're able to switch those out all day long and twice on Sunday. But if we move the actual N64 into frame and get it focused here, Castlevania Legacy of Darkness, a North American game on a North American console, is going to fit totally fine. But if I actually move over the Banjo Tooie cartridge here, you're going to see it's never going to insert, and that is just down to the fact that they use those little security recesses to make sure you couldn't plug a non-region specific card into the wrong region. Just one of those things, a small touch, but I do like it. Now, as far as the OS is concerned, you definitely want to update that before you first turn on the machine. Analogue basically leaves a little card in there. I would say it takes about 3 to 6 minutes according to Analogue. On my count, it was about 4 minutes and 56 seconds on the time code. Not exactly sure what it's updating, but definitely make sure you do that before you open the box up and start playing some games. And as far as connecting the controller, you get a really nice wireframe diagram here. I would say that the actual operating system and graphical user interface does exactly what it needs, nothing more and nothing less. But if you're looking for a super colorful experience, it's one of those things. Analogue definitely went way more subdued with this one, and that does make sense, at least to me. And don't forget, you have to read the end user license agreement. If you don't, they'll make you play a MiSTer FPGA, not your brand new Analogue 3D. And that really is just a joke, because certain commenters seem to think that I don't like Analogue. I did an entire series on the Pocket, and I think so far the Analogue 3D is turning out to be exactly the product that Analogue promised us all it would be. I just wish they actually communicated every once in a while to tell us what was going on. And as of the recording of this video, the Everdrive cartridges do work, with a caveat that I will get into later on in the video. You are going to have to actually update the boot ROM to make sure everything is going to work, but it's one of those things. This was something that the Analogue 3D didn't ship with compatibility wise, and I saw some people on Twitter complaining about the actual maker of the flash cards and blaming him for the fact that that they did not work. I cannot understand that logic whatsoever. These products existed before Analogue 3D did, and based upon the maker's own feedback on Twitter, Analogue did not send him any sort of review units to make sure that these actual accessories worked. So it's one of those things. The maker of the flash cart for the Everdrive went ahead and made sure they updated the firmware to get it working on the Analogue 3D, so they should definitely be commended for that. So as far as flash carts aren't working, all of the Everdrive range is now going to work. The summer cart is as well. Anything else on the market that I'm not aware of, I have absolutely no idea because I can't test stuff that I don't know exists. Let's get the monkey out of the room right now, or at least the elephant. This is Donkey Kong 64, the attract sequence where you don't have control of Donkey Kong on the Analogue 3D. The test here is to see whether or not Donkey Kong is going to grab the vines correctly, or if he's going to get out of time. And you can clearly see here, Donkey Kong is going to be perfectly fine. He will get himself onto the other side of that chasm and into the barrel. Now let's move over to MiSTer FPGA, and we'll see a completely different result. But this is kind of a very interesting result because Donkey Kong is going to miss the vines, but we can actually make him catch the vines on MiSTer FPGA as well by changing around some of the timings in these settings. It's just one of those things. The N64 RAM timings can be tricky, and again, I haven't tested everything comprehensively. This is just going through a first draft. You'll see here we're going to move back to the MiSTer FPGA again with one number adjusted in the RAM timings in these settings, and now what we would expect to see is Donkey Kong fall into the water on MiSTer FPGA, but you're going to see here that he's actually going to grab the vines as well. It is just a setting thing. It's kind of a choice by the core maker, Robert FPGA Zoom Spas, so it is one of those things. People seem to think it's not possible on MiSTer. The reality is you just have to change a setting up. Now moving back over to Analogue 3D, let's take a listen to the audio quality as far as the HDMI output is concerned, and what better way to do it with an iconic music test from Super Mario 64.
Yeah! Woohoo! Yippee! Yeah! Yahoo! Yahoo!
I mean, it sounds exactly like Super Mario 64 should sound like. It plays exactly like it should play, and it looks good to me as well, outside of one tiny little thing, which I will get into in a moment. But if you're just wondering what my overall opinion of the Analogue 3D is, it plays every single N64 game I threw at it. It does an incredible job of doing that, and it is a fun device to actually play around with. Now, if you absolutely want to have cartridges on your FPGA N64, well, obviously right now Analogue 3D is the only vendor that's going to provide that to you until ModRetro releases the M64, which is going to be using the MiSTer FPGA core with enhancements. But let's move over to MiSTer FPGA. Take a look at the sky and take a look at the clouds and take a look at the detail in them, even the overall color in the browns and the greens here. I feel like in some games the gamma on the Analogue 3D is just a little bit too hot to me. Now that is subjective, but I do have 22 years experience as a filmmaker, and I have an MFA in cinematography and color. When we move back over to the Analogue 3D, the browns and the greens are just a little bit too bright to my eye, and that overall cloud there looks like it's about ready to start losing a little bit of detail in the highlights. Again, it is a very small thing, but something I did observe, and I'd like to share that with you. You can leave me a comment down below and you tell me what you'd like to see color-wise. Now popping in another cartridge, you can clearly see here, supports Japanese region perfectly fine, and we're going to pop the overclock all the way to Unleashed to run a little bit of Banjo-Kazooie, because it is a game that definitely could use more frames of performance, and it is a game where with overclock mode on the Analogue 3D or turbo mode on the actual MiSTer FPGA, you can improve the performance of the game in real time. And let's be brutally honest right now, N64 can absolutely run like a slideshow through molasses sometimes. That's just one of those things. The hardware was always pushing at what could be possible for 3D in that era, and sometimes developers actually just decided a prettier looking game was worth it more than a game that actually ran fast. Because when you had magazines back in the day with photos, because we didn't really have trailers to download on the internet, a pretty screenshot made a lot more of a difference when it came to sales than any sort of performance after people actually bought the game, or at least that's my opinion of it. And do be aware that I'm running this on the most extreme overclock that the Analogue 3D provides, and this game seems to handle it perfectly fine. But if you have any performance issues in any games on any of the overclock modes, just remember that not every game is going to be as accepting to actually running the hardware out of spec. The auto mode, which is basically going to take care of everything, should be the one you leave it on unless you actually want to play around with things and know it's going to work. Don't think the Analogue 3D is screwing something up if a game doesn't like to run overclock, because we have the same thing on the MiSTer FPGA side of things, games that just do not like their clock speed messed around with. And this is not going to be some sort of silver bullet to get every game to run faster. Some games lock their frame rate because the game logic is tied to it, so your mileage definitely may vary. But let's go into Perfect Dark again, because this is a game that absolutely benefits from an overclock. And just so you know, there is a performance patch for this game, but I am not running it on either test here. I wanted to have a vanilla experience just with the actual overclocking on the Analogue 3D side of things, and the turbo mode enabled with the turbo core on the MiSTer FPGA side of things. So pay attention to the screen cadence, pay attention to the motion, and the overall fluidity of it. This is Analogue 3D footage, and it's definitely running a lot faster than stock N64 ever would. And that is the nice thing about Analogue 3D, and that's the nice thing about modern FPGA N64s. They can do a better job of being an N64 than the original hardware ever could, because this cutscene in actual N64 hardware can absolutely chug, and in part 2 of the video, I will definitely be showing you guys exactly how that works side by side comparison. But you're in for almost a 35-minute video without those comparisons. That's why I'm going to bring this into a way more granular tested part 2. So again, if you want to see certain tests, leave me that comment down below and tell me what you want to see. I'll definitely try to include it. But the minute we get control of Joanna here, you can absolutely see that this is not the performance of N64 in any way. This is absolutely smooth and buttery. It is performing at such a higher frame rate, and that makes the controls smoother, it makes the gameplay experience better, and it definitely even improves on the aiming, even if you do have quasi-auto aim on in this game by default. It is absolutely a beautiful game, and again, I think it looks great coming out of Analogue 3D, but that light right there felt just a little bit too bright as far as the gamma is concerned. That is the only thing that I keep seeing in the image that kind of throws me a little bit, but again, this is going through a capture card like any bit of hardware could, so it could be something introduced in the capture chain, but honestly I don't believe it is, just because that would also mean that the MiSTer FPGA output would be a little hot as well. Now again, these things are subjective, and you want to see some histograms in the next video, leave me a comment down below and I'll kind of show you where all the colors are and where they're peaking, because when I did look in Resolve, they did have a completely different curve to them as far as some of the highlights are concerned, and that's where I'm seeing that slightly brighter image. But as far as the frame rate on the highest overclock, absolutely spectacular. Now just for fun, let's move over to MiSTer FPGA with the exact same sequence, outside of the fact that don't forget this game has its own logic, so enemies might not show up in the same place, and things are not going to unfold exactly the same, because they don't have the ability to really lock the controller inputs wise across two systems at the same time. But I would say as far as overclocks are concerned, they seem to basically be part of me. One might be running at a frame or two faster here and there, but I'd be hard pressed to tell you which one it is. And if I didn't tell you you were watching MiSTer FPGA footage right now, you probably wouldn't really realize that we actually changed sources outside of the fact that it got just a little bit darker. If you leave me a comment down below and you tell me which one you like better, I would be curious. And if this thing doesn't play Bomberman Hero perfectly, I would throw it in the trash and tell you it's garbage and you should never buy one. And that's just a joke, because Bomberman Hero is still my favorite N64 game of all time. And I will say right now, it is again exceptional on the Analogue 3D. And that's basically my main takeaway from my initial round of testing and my initial review. You put a cartridge in the machine, you start playing it, everything works, you get 4K output, you get the ability to overclock on games you'd want to, but really it is just an N64 and FPGA. It's not going to make the games any worse or any better. If you loved a game on N64, you're going to love it here. If you didn't like it on N64, there's nothing about FPGA technology across any machine that'll run N64 that's going to convince you to like a game you didn't used to like. But Bomberman Hero has long been one of my absolute favorites, and I will say right now in Analogue 3D, I just sit down and play it, and it is every bit as good as it ever was. Now as far as accessory testing is concerned, I tested memory cards, I tested rumble packs, those are perfectly fine, but I don't have a transfer pack in my collection, so it's something I couldn't take a look at. Now with the Analogue 3D footage here, this is one of the games where I feel like that gamma is just getting a little bit too hot again. I know it's a very small thing, but as a filmmaker and a very visual person at that, it is one of the things I notice. As far as the physics, as far as the controls, they are identical across anything I'd played this on. So the next sample is going to be MiSTer FPGA, and the third sample is going to be N64 on the Ultra HDMI mod. If you're wondering why I don't put logos for the different sources down below in the corner of the video, I find them distracting, and I think people end up looking at them more than they actually look at the footage. So I tell you what you're looking at and you'll be able to figure it out from there. So this is the Analogue 3D. Go ahead and pay attention to the grays, the whites, and especially Bomberman's helmet there. Just get a sense of what he overall looks like. At least I think it's a helmet. I've never actually considered what Bomberman is wearing. Now moving over to MiSTer FPGA, you're going to see you get a little bit more shading in that helmet. You get a little bit more evenness in the grays. This is the one main difference I could tell between Analogue 3D and MiSTer FPGA and even real hardware. But it's interesting, it's kind of hard to say which one would be perfect because this is an analog system at its heart. It's what used to be on CRTs back in the day. So the color of N64 to you could be completely different than the color of N64 to me because every television had its own color science and own image reproduction, the same way that the cameras I use have their own color science compared to another brand. We kind of shop by look, so really look is subjective. You can kind of decide which one you want. Now this is the Ultra HDMI mod coming off real N64 hardware, and big thanks to Kilter Music for helping with the HDMI portion of the captures for this video, because I just have a bone stock N64, and comparing Analogue 3D to a Compositor S-Video N64 would be absolutely asinine, so I decided I wasn't going to do that. But I would say this image kind of lands between the two, so you tell me down below which one feels quote-unquote right, Analogue 3D, N64, or MiSTer FPGA. They really do vary ever so slightly, but it's one of those things. I just feel like Bomberman Hero has a certain look, the look I'm used to, and that's kind of down to nostalgia. Now as far as the settings are concerned, you're going to have some good ones here. Obviously you have the virtual expansion pack that is on by default, but you can turn it off for the few games that don't like to support it. You have deblur, 32-bit color, disable anti-aliasing, and you also have the actual overclock menu right now. But let's talk about what isn't here and the Analogue actually previewed in the run-up to Analogue 3D. That is any sort of save state support. We just don't have that right now. The one other issue I found, unfortunately, is with the Everdrive X5, the model I'm using, it will not boot games when any of the overclock settings are enabled. You just get an unexpected error here, or unaccepted. I'm not sure, that's actually a misspelling there, so I don't exactly know what it is as error 02. I tried to get the Everdrive 64, the X5 model, to run on any sort of overclock, and it came up with the exact same error every single time I tried to run it. Again, not the hardware manufacturer's fault on the Everdrive side of things. The product existed before and Analogue didn't send them one to test, but if you find that you're having issues running your flash cart, just go ahead and turn overclock mode off. That unfortunately means you're going to have the original cartridge to be able to do that, but nothing I did on any of the overclock settings allowed me to get into any games. So unfortunately, if your plan is to use an Everdrive X5 on the Analogue 3D with overclock mode enabled all the time to be able to play whatever games you want, you're just going to see that is unfortunately not possible at this point in time. Is it something that could become possible in the future? That is as likely as it is unlikely. I don't know the technical reason as to why this would be happening, but again, do not go over to the maker of this product's Twitter and ask them about it in any sort of mean way. If I send you over there to ask a question, remember I sent you, please be polite because it's something I do appreciate. Now that we're back onto auto mode, we're going to try to load a game up again on the Everdrive X5, and you're going to see everything works perfectly fine with no issues whatsoever. So there's some sort of conflict or interference between the overclocking of Analogue 3D and the Everdrive X5, which just causes this thing not to want to load up the games. So if you want to use OC mode, just be aware that flash carts might not allow you to load up all the games or any of the games. But again, big thanks to the maker of the Everdrive for going in and even updating the firmware, because it's one of those things. This is going to benefit the community, and they did it after Analogue 3D shipped. Just be aware that you need to update the bootloader, and I will leave a link to the website down below where you can grab that. Now if you own one, you do need to update this on an actual N64 console. It will not boot on Analogue 3D beforehand. But it's one of those things, if you own a flash card for an N64, I feel like you probably own an N64. But if you do buy one just because you own an Analogue 3D now, you might want to ask the manufacturer or whoever is selling it to you whether or not that bootloader's been updated, because if you get a hold of it and it doesn't boot on your Analogue 3D, you're going to have to find an N64 to be able to update it before it will work. Now let's take a look at Resident Evil 2, not so much for the gameplay, even though it's an awesome port, always considered to be the impossible port for the fact that it actually got FMV video over. I don't really care about something like Resident Evil 2 based upon how it performs on MiSTer FPGA or Analogue 3D outside of one very specific instance. That is because the fact is, this game will pivot between 240p and 480i on the fly, so we want to see how that actual changeover is. You might see that the screen gets uncentered on both assets and both source sources, and that's just because that's exactly what the game does. None of these games are meant to be on HDMI televisions at 1080p or 4K. They were always meant to be on something like an actual CRT, where all of this issue would be basically hidden by the overscan. What you'll see here as we come around the corner, it is going to change resolutions, and you will see a little bit more of a black bar at the bottom, and now all of a sudden it is wider, and it is filling the screen, but we didn't lose sync. There wasn't really any blip there, back and forth. That is a good result, and that's what we would expect to see out of something like Analogue 3D. And if you're wondering, I did it on purpose just for the fun of it to see that graphic. But let's do that same run again just to not die here, and again pay attention to the width and aspect ratio of the screen. The reality is 240p and 480i content were always meant for CRT television where you never notice the difference. These were never meant to be displayed on HDMI TVs or scalers or anything else, but the fact that it works as well here, basically the exact same result as something like MiSTer FPGA, means that that actual signal switching and the sync on the Analogue 3D scaler all the way up to 4K is working as intended, and there's no issues whatsoever. Let's move over to something like Beetle Adventure Racing, and we're not really using the overclock mode here, we're just running it as stock. It's just one of those things, kind of wanted to test this back and forth to see what's going on. This is a game that's always been a little bit too clean looking in HDMI, and the Analogue 3D is not really going to change that too much here either. The point is, it's not an Analogue 3D issue, it's that some games on N64 just always look better on a CRT television, and unfortunately there really isn't a way to get an analog signal out of the Analogue 3D. I'm going to be testing some adapters to see if I can get it down to at least 480p on something like a VGA monitor, but Beetle Adventure Racing with all the fog in the background is definitely one that I think looks better on a CRT television, whether you're on real N64 hardware, whether you're on Analogue 3D, or whether you're on MiSTer FPGA. But you leave me a comment down below and you tell me how you feel about that, because again this fog just blends a lot better on an actual tube TV in my opinion, way better than anything else it could possibly be used on. Now moving over to the Ultra HDMI on real N64 hardware, I would say it's the exact same answer. I really appreciate all the HDMI mods, and I really appreciate all the scalers out there in the world, but there's just some titles that are always going to benefit from that old phosphor. It's one of those things, the way that a CRT draws its image, the way that it has that glow, even a certain smell and feel in the room, is something that the Analogue 3D will never be able to replicate, that MiSTer FPGA will never be able to replicate, and that ModRetro M64 will never be able to replicate, at least on an HDMI signal. But hopefully someday Analogue remembers that DAC exists and they'll allow to get some updates to actually make something like Analogue 3D work with the analog signal output. That really is my hope here, because I want something like an FPGA N64 with cart reading to be able to work on my PVMs, my consumer TVs, as well as my 4K OLED, the LG C4. But I just really feel like that's kind of a me thing. You leave me a comment down below and you tell me, primarily a CRT user or primarily an LCD user for your retro games. I know it definitely kind of goes back and forth, so that's one of those things I'd be curious to hear what everyone likes. But it's not an ugly image, that's for sure, whether you're on Ultra HDMI or whether you're on the Analogue 3D. Still definitely a 10 out of 10 in both respects. Now as far as the screen filters are concerned, Analogue has this footnote on their website that says you can't capture them. They do not work on capture card, only on televisions. I have absolutely no idea what they're on about with that one, because I'm able to capture these things perfectly fine. We have BVM, CVM, CRT, scan lines, and clean. And I will admit right now, I'm really not a scanline user for the most part, and I think in general, YouTube absolutely compresses the ever-loving hell out of them and just kind of makes a mess of the entire situation. But for people that like them, they seem to be doing a really good job. Now something like the RetroTink 4K using an HDMI modded N64 is going to give you a ton more filters and a ton more ability to articulate the image, but this is definitely doing a good job. You're also going to get stuff like de-blur and 32-bit color, and 32-bit color is definitely going to be a nice bonus for Analogue 3D. You can also disable anti-aliasing if you so choose. That's in the hardware options menu. If we actually go over to display mode, you're going to be able to see that you have different settings here for all of the different actual filters. You're going to have different gamma options, different interpolation algorithms, sharpness, image size, and image fit. Again, there is no wrong answer here as to what you want to use, and there is no right answer either. If you play around with it and you find the overall image that you like for a game, that means the answer for what's the best for you is exactly that. Don't let anyone tell you that screen filters need to be used. Don't let anyone tell you not to use them or to use certain settings. Do whatever you would like. Analogue has given you a decent suite here, maybe a little bit less than I would have expected, but it really is one of those things. It comes pretty close to satisfying what I need. Let's do one more soundtrack sample just because I want you to hear the audio quality output one more time, and I'll be right back with a bit more. I mean, that just sounds like Donkey Kong 64 should, so as far as the audio quality on the Analogue 3D, I have absolutely no notes for it whatsoever. Everything sounded clear, every single bit of music, every single note and tone was exactly what I would expect out of the games that I remember by heart. Donkey Kong 64 being one that I always test on FPGA core software emulators and played the ever-loving hell out back in the day. And if you want to quit the game, you just go ahead and quit cartridge, and then you take the cartridge out of a machine that's powered on. That is always going to feel weird to me, but that's exactly how you do it. Or something like Castlevania Legacy of Darkness here. Obviously you can use the expansion pack, and this is one that would definitely benefit from being in overclock mode, but I didn't run it there, just because I wanted to see the original screen cadence compared to N64. And don't let anyone tell you Legacy of Darkness or Castlevania 64 are bad games. They might not be perfect, but there is a lot of fun to be had, and that's why a lot of people I think are going to enjoy Analogue 3D the same way they enjoyed MiSTer FPGA, especially if you use a flash cartridge and have every single game at the tip of your fingers. But don't forget, you should own every single one of those games, so you better have a full set, or else Nintendo is definitely coming for you. But this is just like playing Legacy of Darkness on real N64 hardware, or like playing it on MiSTer FPGA. So I just want you to realize one thing, and I mean this in a nice way, not a negative way towards Analogue or anybody else. This hardware is no magic bullet. It is not going to fix the inherent flaws in N64. Yes, you can get some more frames out of the mix, but it's still going to be basically the same image from back in the day, and obviously the games are going to have the same gameplay. So if you're one of those commenters that says the N64 is always a blurry mess with bad textures, you're not going to get better textures here, because this is still just running the game as it would on N64 hardware on the image side of things. And yes, I understand this outputs at 4K, but a lot of people have been getting confused thinking that the game is internally scaled to 4K. That is not the case here whatsoever. It's either rendering it in 240p or 480i depending on what the actual game is calling for, and then it is scaling it in post to 4K. And I will say the one thing that I'm a little bit let down by is the fact that the deinterlacer is just weave. There really isn't any bob method. That would be something nice for an update in the future if Analogue wants to give us one, because I would say as far as the deinterlacer is concerned, not really standing up to the best of what MiSTer FPGA can put against it. But honestly, overclock mode, 4K out, these are all amazing features, and clearly if you want to play something like your actual N64 cartridges, for the time being, Analogue 3D is the only option on the market. Now of course that is going to change in the future with the ModRetro M64, which is going to be based on the MiSTer FPGA core as well, and I will definitely do some side-by-side comparisons of the hardware so you can better understand what's going on out there with FPGA technology as well as the code that is loaded onto the chips. Because trust me, I've said this once, I've said this 100 times, the chips do absolutely nothing. It is the coders that make or break N64, and as far as the performance on Analogue 3D on the FPGA core, it is exceptional. I really don't have anything to point to say I don't like it. So now here's a fun test at the end of the video before I ask you guys what you want to see for part 2. This footage is either off MiSTer FPGA, it's off Analogue 3D, or it's off an actual N64 with the Ultra HDMI mod. You go ahead and you pay attention to everything you're seeing here based upon everything I talked about in the video, and you leave me a comment down below and you tell me, is this Analogue 3D, is it MiSTer FPGA, or is it real N64 hardware? And the reality of the situation is this is basically a quasi-joke. Only the eagle-eyed among you are going to be able to tell any differences that would allow you to identify what we're actually running it on. And the point of that is to say all three of these sources are basically identical, and all three are basically going to give you identical performance. If you have a MiSTer FPGA and you don't care about cart reading, then the Analogue 3D is not really going to offer you anything outside of 4K output, which definitely could be important to some people. If you have an HDMI modded N64 and you don't care about something like 4K, or you have a RetroTink 4K or a Pixel Effects 4K, the Analogue 3D is not going to offer you anything that you don't already have. But if you don't have a MiSTer FPGA, if you don't have a modded N64, and you want to pick up something like the Analogue 3D, it totally could be for you. Unfortunately, it is sold out. We don't know when there's going to be more. And trust me, I will definitely do a way more comprehensive core comparison video. But honestly, we're already at 34 minutes here, and I could have put another half an hour in just for those tests, so I am breaking it apart. But leave me a comment down below and you tell me, what games do you specifically want to see tested against MiSTer FPGA and Analogue 3D? And before you say I want there to be a winner, I don't. I want more options on the market so that everyone wins when they want to play retro games. But we're done. Analogue 3D is great. I'll see you next time. Bye bye.